Now, the right time with Bomani Jones on ESPN Radio.
And ESPNradio.com.
Before we get to talking some about these NBA playoffs and the things that happen, I have to say, me and my buddy Stosh, producer of the show, were just discussing the situation that happened in Philadelphia where the old lady tried to make the catch, and she didn't make the catch, and then the ball fell, and she's reaching over the rail to catch the ball. I mean, when I say she's an old lady, you know, I'm not so great at guessing women's ages because I just always say 29, because what's the good of being right? Anyway, she looked like she was probably late 60s. She didn't make the catch with her glove, and the dude came over and kind of strong-armed out the way to get the baseball, and everybody's down on the dude. And I'm like, yo, wouldn't have had that problem if she made the catch. Right? Wouldn't have had that problem if she made the catch. She made the catch, everything is okay. You know, I mean, she's a competitor. She was going for it. She clearly fancies herself as some variety of an athlete. She was out there with a baseball glove in the first place. Hey, man, as a competitor, she got to understand how it goes, right? You know, so I said that on TV today. Man, apparently you guys just don't have the kind of sense of humor that I have. I had all kinds of people, you talking about hitting that woman shows just how classless you are. I never told you I was classy. I'll tell you this, I bet you next time she catches the ball. Anyway, the telephone number is 888-SAY-ESPN. That is 888-729-3776. The Clippers. Yo, I think that we can all agree that right there was pretty embarrassing, huh? They were up 19 late in Game 6. Those of you who are tennis fans, you might be able to compare this to, who was that Yana Novotná lost to that one time? She was up 40 love on the match point and just gave the whole thing away. That's basically what the Clippers did. I don't think that they choked in Game 7. I think that by the time Game 7 came around, they just simply run out of gas. They absolutely did choke in Game 6. There's no question about that. They choked in Game 6. Now, they're left in a situation where I don't know what they're supposed to do right now. I have no idea what they're supposed to do right now. And when I say I don't know what they're supposed to do, DeAndre Jordan is due for his money. And the word is that DeAndre Jordan is seeking a contract 5 years for $20 million a year. And there are all kinds of people that are saying, ha, 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 I guess. And he's absolutely going to get that money. He ain't worth it to the Clippers. He's worth it to somebody. And I don't want to have to get into the breakdown of DeAndre Jordan's game and what's good about it, what's bad about it. There's no need for that. All that matters is if you're going to have a team that's got 3 max contract players, they all have to be some form of credible offensive threat, I would think, or something in the ballpark of it, right? DeAndre Jordan causes so many problems because of his inability to do anything offensively other than dunk. If you're already paying Chris Paul and you're already paying Blake Griffin, I don't think that DeAndre Jordan is the third guy that you go for. Now, you can't replace his he's the best defensive rebounder in the league. The best defensive rebounder in the league. You're not going to be able to replace that, but maybe you put all this stuff together and take that money and turn it into something else. I don't know. But did you see the report? I think it's FoxSports.com. Bill Reeder reported that apparently sometime during the season, DeAndre Jordan and Chris Paul had a bit of a falling out that lingered throughout the year. I don't know exactly when Mr. Reeder says that this took place, but am I the only person that wants to guess that it probably took place that time that Chris Paul started jumping up and down and pointing in that dude's face? Like, I imagine, if you're DeAndre Jordan, that's got to be a real frustrating situation. 'Cause let me tell you one thing that I imagine is really good about being really big and really tall. People don't really get in your face with a lot of that jibber-jabber. You know what I mean? Like, if you're DeAndre Jordan, ain't a whole lot of people just getting up in your face and pointing at you and jumping up and down and screaming at you. Because ultimately, man, if DeAndre Jordan put those hands on you, it's a wrap. Like, I understand the NBA is not really a fighting league. We all talk about that. We all get that. But none of us want DeAndre Jordan to punch us in the face. And we all know that when you jump up and down and point your finger in somebody's face, they're well within their rights to knock your block. We all get that. You don't believe me? Go point in your daddy's face right now and see how quick it is that you get slapped. I mean, that's how it goes. You know, I don't really know if you think that this is not necessarily a civilized sort of discussion. I'm just telling you what's real out here in these streets. Streets with a K. Anyway, you imagine being DeAndre Jordan and Chris Paul is jumping up and down in your faces, pointing at you, and you just can't do anything about it? And you can't, because he's Chris Paul. Like, he's the leader of the team. He's the guy that's supposedly in charge, and also says he's Chris Paul, and especially because it's in an arena with 20,000 people, you're just not allowed to hit him. Like, that's against the rules. There will be no punching of Chris Paul. Hey, man, if this dude can jump up in my face and do all of that and I'm not allowed to punch him in the face, hell no, I ain't coming back to play here no more. What, are you crazy? Like, we've been hearing all through the year about this idea that Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan, the guys on the team find it difficult to play with Chris Paul. They don't enjoy playing with Chris Paul. Let me ask this question about Chris Paul. Does Chris Paul really have the receipts to behave the way that he does? Like, I'm not the guy that's going to get out here and start talking about Chris Paul isn't that good because he hadn't been to the second round, past the second round of the playoffs. I think with context, it's not that simple, and we see enough of Chris Paul. Chris Paul put up like an Isaiah Thomas-like performance on one leg against San Antonio in Game 7 in the first round. Like, this isn't the year that I'm going to come out here and talk to you about what's wrong with Chris Paul. Like, I don't think that's fair, at least as a basketball player. I understand if you're the type that's going to come out here and say it's been 10 years, he's never been that far, he's a bum, but I don't do that in general. Like, if you ever do that with anybody, then you got to do that with him. You have to. He has basically the same postseason resume as Dominique Wilkins, who everybody holds up as the guy that simply couldn't win. So, like, if you're that guy, then you got to go ahead and you got to be that guy with Chris Paul. That's fine. My thing with Chris Paul, and that I'm asking as it relates to the Clippers, is he's a bit grating. He's a bit tough to play with. Guys don't enjoy it. And Chris Paul hasn't really done anything that would indicate that he should be allowed to be out here talking to people like this. He's not Kobe Bryant. He's not. Kobe had the receipts to be that. And guys ain't feel like putting up with that stuff with him. So we get to this end of Game 7. Blake Griffin did not play well in Game 7. We've had people question Blake Griffin and Blake Griffin's leadership and whether Blake Griffin's going to take that next step. Let me ask you a real question. Can you take that next step if you're Blake Griffin playing with Chris Paul? Because Blake Griffin is the caliber of player that should be the best player on his team. Now, I don't know what happens if you make Blake Griffin the best player on your team. But is there a certain level of maturity that he doesn't reach if Chris Paul is absolutely so much in charge in the way that he is? Let me give you an example in another sport. I've always contended, and there have been people who've said this, that a big part of why the Panthers had to get rid of Steve Smith was not so much about Steve Smith as football player, whether he still has something to contribute, is whether Cam Newton was going to be able to grow up and become the leader of the team that you want him to be, as long as you have such a dominant personality in place. Now, I bring this up with Chris Paul and find it more interesting with Chris Paul because as good as Chris Paul is, Chris Paul has a limitation that I'm sure, hey, don't tell him I said this, man, because guys take this real personal when you say things like this. But, you know, you got to be this tall to ride, man. In this league, it is very difficult for the most dominant player on a team to be a player who is 6 feet tall. Especially a player whose effectiveness is most there when he's ball dominant. Like, can a guy that size hold the ball as much as Chris Paul seems to need to hold the ball? And it's not that he's selfish, but he needs to have the ball in his hand, right? Can you do it with that being the guy that needs to have the ball in his hand? I don't have an answer for that. Like, everything that we talk about with the Clippers, you wind up almost at the end with, I don't have an answer for that. I have no idea what in the world they're supposed to do. I do know this, though. What's got to be the worst part of being with the Clippers The city that you play in doesn't give a damn about you, which means the only time you ever get any attention is when people like me are kind of sort of asking whether you need to blow the whole damn thing up.
Geico presents Strange Savings Stories. Astronomers detected an interstellar transmission. It stated, Geico, 15 minutes could save you 15% or more. The implications were staggering. Was the cosmos telling us we could all save hundreds on car insurance with Geico? Or did their radar merely pick up a signal from the nearby Rufus and Clyde's morning show? We may never know.
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
Bomani.
Are you guys prepared for a world where the Atlanta Hawks are in the NBA Finals? Because I think the Atlanta Hawks are going to make the NBA Finals. Yeah. I know a lot of you guys probably don't think that the Hawks are going to make the NBA Finals because, for God's sake, they're the Atlanta Hawks. We need to start looking at what's going on with the playoffs and realize we're at a place where all these things that we thought would never happen, like at least 2 or 3 of them have to. Like, I've been skeptical of Golden State because, I am somewhat skeptical of a team where so much of what they do is predicated upon making jump shots. Well, damn, that's all the teams that are left. So whoever it is that's going to be. Right? The Hawks have 5 guys on the floor at all times who can play on the perimeter. That means that your man Mozgov, whose addition along with J.R. Smith made all the difference for the Cavs, Mozgov ain't going to be able to camp out in the lane. His rim protection made them better. How are they going to protect the rim without him there? They are a poor defensive team, generally speaking. Kyrie Irving's out here on one leg. Yo, man, it sounds like the Hawks are going to go to the NBA Finals. Where are the locusts?
Bomani.
As someone who hosts a radio show that he wishes to be an intimate sort of gathering where we're all friends, we talk, and we help each other through things. You know, like I want this to be like a big old nationwide family. That's the way I see it. And I stood before you guys all vulnerable, right? I put myself before you, and things could go wrong, but like I, as a man who, like many men, at times struggle with being vulnerable, I come before you and I tell you that the Atlanta Hawks are going to go to the NBA Finals. Like, do you realize how much it took me to say that? Like, do you understand, like, within me, how naked I am laying myself before you? And what do I get back from y'all? Ridicule. That's all I received was ridicule. No one wants to give me any credit for my courage, right? Nobody wants to just stop and take a couple of minutes. And if you think I'm crazy, like, Bomani, are you okay? You know, I just want to talk to you about it and just kind of see, you know, what's going on with you and how we, like, I'm not getting any of that right now. I'm not getting any of that from y'all. All I got was undeserved ridicule. Come on, man. It's just a matchup issue. That's all it comes down to. It's a matchup issue. And don't forget, the Hawks don't have somebody that can shut down LeBron James. Those kinds of players don't really exist. Like Kawhi Leonard could probably do it in stretches, right? DeMarre Carroll is of that, like, Jimmy Butler, Kawhi Leonard type. It's not going to be easy. I'm just saying, man, just stop and think about this. And beyond simply stopping and thinking about this, here's what I need you to consider. The whole reason y'all aren't feeling this about the Hawks really is that they're the Hawks. And I understand that because I'm kind of right there with you. But they're playing the Cavs. You understand what I'm saying? They're playing the Cavs. Like, if you're assuming there's something karmic in the air that's going to stop a team from winning, how the hell are you going to bet on Cleveland? No disrespect, Cleveland. You understand what I mean, though. All right, moving on, and the telephone number is 888-729-3776. I have been very resistant all year to this idea of the greatness of the Golden State Warriors. And statistically, look, the guys like Tom Haberstroh, big Haberstroh fan, by the way, the guys that really follow the numbers tell you that this really seems like one of the 10 best teams in NBA history. Like, they're right on line with, like, the 1972 Lakers, 96 Bulls. That level of dominance is what you've gotten from the Warriors this year. Now, the issue is that the Warriors are playing really according to a paradigm that we've never had in the NBA. Like, those of us who grew up in isolation-era basketball understand that this feels weird. This is different. The idea that you're going to win a championship with Stephen Curry as your best player, like, that's a lot to wrap your arms around. It really, really is. But, like, Charles Barkley has, I think, taken the brunt from a lot of people because he seems to go so hard on the Warriors, right? So hard on the Warriors. And the reason he goes so hard on the Warriors is like they're a jump shooting team. They shoot too many jump shots. And I've always agreed with that because, look, as those series get longer and longer and everybody knows everybody's sets and everybody gets more banged up, you need to get easy baskets. And I'm just not of the mind frame that I'll ever think of a three-pointer in the corner or anywhere else as being an easy basket. Like, that's just really hard for me to wrap my mind around. That being said, the 4 teams that made the most three-pointers this year are the 4 teams that are left. So if my issue with the Warriors is that they shoot too many jumpers or shoot too many three-pointers, who am I supposed to pick? You got anything? Because I don't. Of the teams that are left, they are clearly the best one. There is no other team in the playoffs that anyone would ever dare say is a great team. The Warriors are the only ones that seem to fit that profile. And look, I've also been a big Steve Kerr critic, not a critic, but a skeptic, but I thought it was fair to be skeptical. This is new. What he did last series was important. He made the adjustment that turned the series, and Dave Yeager couldn't make the adjustment on the other end. That's what he did. I feel like if there's an adjustment that needs to be made by somebody in a series against the Rockets, it'll be Steve Kerr that makes it and not Kevin McHale. Like, I think that they probably should handle the Rockets pretty quickly, right? So, yeah, you heard me. I'm going with it. Warriors, Hawks in the finals. And I tell you right now, if the Hawks make the finals, you better believe I'm flying to Atlanta. I'm taking my daddy to the game. I think he still roots for the Hawks. I quit the Hawks. Like, those of you who don't know, I grew up in Houston, but we lived in Atlanta the first 7 years of my life. So when we got to Houston, I already had my teams. Like, the first thing I ever loved in this world was the Atlanta Braves, right? So you'll hear me get emotional at times about the Braves for that reason. The Hawks, I used to be about the Hawks. And then on February 24th, 1994, the Hawks decided that they didn't want me to be a fan anymore. They decided they didn't want a whole lot of people to be fans anymore. And that was the day that they decided that they would trade the greatest player in franchise history for 26 games of Danny Manning. I haven't let it slide. I'm not going to let it slide. They're kind of dead to me. But I would love nothing more than to take my father to an NBA Finals game. He lives in Atlanta. My man Sir Foster on the organ will be killing it. Like, let's just say an Oakland-Atlanta matchup in the NBA Finals, ooh, boy, I can smell the barbecue.
And now, for Geico's edition of Stuff Found in Your Car, we go inside your side door pocket.
Hello, yes, the crumpled receipt with gum in it. From your anniversary dinner, you sprang for expensive wine, your server was Beth. That dinner was a couple $100. Money you could get back if you switched to Geico and saved hundreds of dollars on your car insurance. I bet you'd save that receipt. Frame it even. But really, where did I go wrong? Was it the corkage fee?
Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com today.
Bomani.
Switching gears just a little bit to the NFL. Justin Smith retired today from the 49ers. I imagine that he is going to now begin an arm wrestling career because he looks like a dude that can arm wrestle very well. Like, we interview guys, for Highly Questionable. It's a show I do with Dan Le Batard on ESPN 4:30 Eastern Time. And we talk to football players a lot, and the question that Dan likes to ask is, who's the strongest guy on your team? And then normally we find out some incredible feat of strength. And every time we asked the 49er who was the strongest guy on the team, the answer was the same every single time. Justin Smith. Like, we asked Vernon Davis, who's the strongest guy on the team? Justin Smith. It never failed. And he's that kind of strong. Like, Justin Smith looked like he has never lifted a weight in his life. Not that he doesn't work out, but there's a lot better ways to work out than lifting weights. Like, why lift weights when you can just pull your truck? Like Walter Jones used to do that. Walter Jones, soon to be Hall of Fame offensive lineman for the Seahawks. Walter Jones, when he was holding out on the franchise tag, he'd just stay at home and push his Escalade. Like that's what he would do instead of going to training camp, was to push his Escalade. Like Justin Smith looks like, hey, you put 30 bales of hay over there, I'll toss 30 bales of hay. Like that kind of strong. Like that human, simple strength is what they like to call it. Anyway, I saw a very interesting statistic about the 49ers. The 4 players on that team who took the most defensive snaps since 2010 were Justin Smith, Patrick Willis, Ahmad Brooks, and Ray McDonald. Ask me how many of those guys still play for the 49ers. None. Not a single one. They lost 2 Hall of Fame caliber front 7 players in one offseason. One they saw coming, one they absolutely did not. NFL, man, they were 3 yards away, was it, from winning the Super Bowl? And you get so close and you have a team like that and they got all these young guys and they got the young quarterback and you're like, they'll get back here. They're going to be contenders for this for a long time. No, apparently not, right? Apparently not. And, I mean, they could still be good. Like, I don't know how good the talent is that they're bringing up. Like, some of these guys they're bringing up are good, but they've lost so much. Chris Borland, the young man who decided to retire, who they, thought was going to be a pretty good inside linebacker for him, he's not going to be playing anymore. Navarro Bowman, who'll be coming off one of the most catastrophic knee injuries any of us have ever seen, he's not going to be there anymore. Frank Gore, he's not there anymore. Like, they had their run, they had their blip, they had their chance, and I don't know what the hell's going to happen next. Like, maybe they're building something like the Patriots or like the Seahawks seem to think that they're building, where they can just go next man up, and they can just bring the next man on the gig, and then it can go from there. Right? Maybe that is what they can do. Maybe that's it. But it is crazy to think of how much change that team is undergoing just this quickly, just right now.
Bomani.
We're presented by Progressive Insurance, and all guests join us on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline. Like our next guest, he's on the staff at ESPN, the magazine. He occasionally appears on Around the Horn, and basically he's going to sell us all out to the robots when they take over because he's encouraging that whole horror flick sort of thing. His name is Pablo Torre. Pablo, what's going on?
I also sometimes appear in your house, like twice a month at this point. I'm in Miami for some reason, and you are always good enough to host me. So I also do that. I also squat on top of your balcony and just stare wistfully into the ocean.
No, and it works out very well because I don't actually have any friends. So, like, it's like, ooh, Pablo's in town. There we go. Man, you saw the Clippers and the Rockets. You are on the analytics program, and I hate to say it like that because I think most people are on the program of more information is better. But Doc the GM, not a good look for Doc the GM, huh?
No, not exactly. And we should be clear, by the way, about our differences when it comes to analytics. Like, I think that our conversations throughout the past couple of years have led me to believe that I am sort of more naturally sympathetic to those nerds that are now infiltrating all of these front offices. And you're more skeptical, I think, naturally than I am. And the Doc the GM thing, I was thinking about it because one of the things that we've sort of learned from this conference finals is, here's the validation of all these three-point shooting teams, these analytically minded teams. Well, there's another side to analytics that's more than just shooting a lot of threes, and that's how you staff your front office. And like Doc Rivers somehow, like it's not just that there are these teams that are stuck in the mud in some ways. Doc Rivers is the general manager of the Clippers. And from every indication that I've heard in this league, they are not as staffed as they don't have these spreadsheet monkeys, basically, these guys who are like analyzing the salary cap, getting all these bargains, getting these bench players that the Rockets had, for instance. And some of that has to be on Doc, the fact that he is this kind of stick in the mud when it comes to staffing a front office like that.
Well, I wonder about that. We're talking to Pablo Torre of ESPN, the magazine. If you're Doc, you're the coach and the general manager. That's 2 jobs. Wouldn't you want as many people as possible on the job that you can't do on the day-to-day?
And the job, and this is the point, the job that he's doubling up on, that he's way worse at, that everybody knows he's way worse at this point, is the job that is going to these, maniacal, very laser-focused, quantitative dudes. Like Doc Rivers, maybe at a certain point in the NBA's recent history, could have gotten away with this way more convincingly, but I feel like, and maybe again it's this one series that's making me think of it, but the fact that their roster is lacking these kind of, these second rounder classic under-scouted guys. His bench was Spencer Hawes and Big Baby Davis and Jamal Crawford, who's always Jamal Crawford. But other than that, I mean, the construction of this team is beginning to reflect a front office that doesn't have those very full-time, overworked kind of quantitative nerds that a lot of other teams have.
Well, see, here's the thing. I don't even necessarily think that Doc needs some nerds. I just think Doc needs somebody other than Doc, because I don't think that you needed to be that laser focused or that bright to realize that the dudes they had on that bench weren't going to cut it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have any of those spreadsheets whatsoever, but I know they have to depend on Glenn Davis way too much.
Yeah, that is also fair. I think the bar at which Doc Rivers could have come off as far more competent in the aftermath of this season. Yeah, you didn't need, mini Daryl Morey, although the symmetry of that series was convenient. You just needed a guy who was going to actually put in the hours as a GM and be able to do the things that I'm sure Doc Rivers ultimately wasn't so keen on doing.
Well, you talked about, with these teams that they crank this out, they figure out all the things that they need, the spreadsheet stuff and everything else. Now, with the Rockets, I've always contended that ignores some personality stuff, and basically the two guys that are supposed to steady your ship are James Harden and Dwight Howard, and that doesn't sound like a great idea. But they're in the Western Conference Finals, so I don't know what to do with anything anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Rockets and this is where Charles Barkley and Daryl Morey naturally agree, even if at least Charles has a lot of fun intimating that they don't. I mean, look, they want stars, they want superstars, and the way the dice rolled for the Houston Rockets and Daryl Morey, like the superstars they got just happened to be two of the more polarizing and very differently polarizing superstars. And I mean, the fact that you're led by two pretty unlikable guys who both challenge the literal way the game is played and are so aesthetically unpleasing isn't going to win you any popularity contests either. The fact that Harden is this very, very good player in terms of getting to the line and doing all the things that are basically boring to anybody who's just watching basketball for the first time, and Dwight Howard, who is from the tradition of almost, hack-a-center centers. I mean, that's, again, this thing that's come up through the playoffs. So, to me, yeah, Daryl Morey is ultimately getting superstars. Whether these are the two superstars that he's going to rely on is kind of a hilarious thing if you're a guy who's so risk-averse and quantitative.
So I got to tell you, we're talking to Pablo Torre of ESPN, the magazine. You also see him on Around the Horn. So, I don't really have any problem with Daryl Morey per se, and I would never root against Daryl. I have no reason to explicitly. There are people that I will at times explicitly root against, and disagreements though I may have with him, I've never been at a point of rooting against him. However, I can't imagine how insufferable the world will be if Daryl Morey gets a ring.
I mean, it's so fascinating, to think about where we are in these NBA playoffs and think about, man, the conference finals, that's this huge thing. Actually, it turns out that we're all going to use only making the conference finals as a mark against somebody. And that's kind of what's happened to these analytically driven teams. I mean, the Sloan Conference every year is acutely aware of the fact that, again, this character from our past, Phil Jackson, right? He comes out of the woodwork on the internet, a fan of yours, incidentally, as everybody I'm sure who's listening to this show understands, a fan of your work on Twitter, Bomani Phil Jackson, but also a guy who is out there basically literally in advertisements dumping out a bag of rings onto a table, and he can't tweet because he's wearing all of these rings. Once that ring comes in, and it's funny that we haven't given the power of that ring, we haven't given that ring to the Dallas Mavericks yet. Even though they basically were an analytically driven team that won in 2011. We didn't give it to the Spurs, even though they are this very analytically driven team that determines rest and substitution patterns based on quantitative understandings of how the human body works. And we didn't give it to the Miami Heat, even though they have this, front office that's more analytically driven than people realize. But Daryl Morey getting it is people need to understand who Daryl is. He is the prom king of the annual, Nerd Fest in sports, the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, which I love. and Daryl winning it, that is going to make that conference so hilarious for so many reasons next year.
Yeah, and that's why not against him, right? But it can't be this, man. Like, it just cannot. It can't be that. And you know me, I'm not turning down data, right? I'm not turning down information.
No, you are an economist.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I am an economist. And see, this is what I think the analytics guys do have, and a lot of those guys do have a bit of an economics background, and that I think is a fairly important point to note, which is we're talking about the margins. Like, the difference between winning a championship and not is at the margins. So with Charles Barkley, I think he makes an interesting point. Like, it gets kind of misinterpreted when he says, well, what analytics do the Spurs have? Of course the Spurs are really analytically driven. His point is it didn't take a spreadsheet to tell you that Tim Duncan's a good player, right? But the margins are where these things happen. The margins are where these things change, and where the teams are so close to being the same level of good, it's the little things that make the difference. And there's something to be said for the fact now that the Rockets are at this point and they have that level of talent. I think that's where the analytics stuff really starts to matter.
Well, absolutely. And so it's in terms of identifying those marginal talents, filling out your bench, making investments abroad, using exchange rates, like modeling exchange rates is a very economic concept. Teams are doing that. Smart teams are doing that, realizing, wait, what is this player's statistics? What are his statistical profile in Europe? What does that indicate about what he can do in America? They're actually trying to find quantitative, algorithmic ways to figure that out. But I would also note it's not just the scouting and the identifying of these marginal bench talents. It's also the fact that, look, how did they get James Harden? They got a bunch of assets. And how do you get assets in the most efficient way possible? You use this quantitatively oriented system. You use a ton of spreadsheets. Sam Hinkie, GM famously of the 76ers, or as I like to call him, the guy people think Daryl Morey really is. If you are an analytics guy, an anti-analytics guy, Sam Hinkie is the person you fear. It's not really Daryl Morey. People should know that. Sam Hinkie was instrumental in obtaining James Harden for the Rockets because he had this decision tree of all these different steps, and it's this very quantitatively laid out thing. How you get a superstar is ultimately a pretty boring and transactional kind of process, and the Rockets figured out a way to efficiently do that. Now, you could argue that luck was enormously important there. Luck, obviously, the confluence of circumstances that led the Thunder to giving up effectively on James Harden was insanely lucky and fortunate given the timing. But the fact that the Rockets were prepared at that moment says something about, their insanity as well.
You are correct, and my big fear is that the farther we move the decision-making from those with some human familiarity with athletes, the closer we get to a really, really scary world that's not entirely dissimilar from the robot revolution that you inexplicably continue to root for. His name is Pablo Torre from ESPN, the magazine. Catch him on Around the Horn. Are you doing Dan's radio show next week?
I'll be in the room you are in right now next week. And you know what? Here's a good point. Allen Iverson would be sorted out by the robots. I feel like the robots would not have Rasheed Wallace and Allen Iverson and all these guys we love. That is an absolutely fair criticism.
I don't watch basketball for efficiency. I watch it for fun, and that's not what you dorks are. You're cool. I'm talking about your friends. Pablo, appreciate you, man.
The royal you. The royal you. That's all I have.
The royal you. That's right, my man. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
The Right Time with Bomani Jones. Weeknights from 9 to 11 Eastern or on demand at ESPNradio.com.